The lunch sometimes will be insane. Fried chicken, fried in funnel cake batter with powdered sugar and cornbread flapjacks. Like super gourmet.
How many hours do you work every day?
The first few weeks were like very like, whoa. But,
how much of your time do you have to spend coding? How did you pass the interview? What are the people like?
Welcome back to Unmasked, where we show you behind the scenes of various different professions. Today, we have our guest, Daniel Sunderland, who was a biomedical engineer at first, transitioned to software engineering due to some circumstances during the pandemic, then got a job at HCL Tech, where he is a contractor. He contracted first for USAA and is now currently a contractor for Meta. Thank you very much for coming on the pod, Dan.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
You had like a interesting transition into tech. Why don't you tell us how you ended up going into tech in the first place?
Yeah, so with that biomedical engineering degree that I had, I was actually planning on going to medical school. And I did actually end up interviewing at one school. It was Carl, Illinois. That was a engineering medical school. So very on track for kind of what I was looking for. The thing is that I didn't get in that time. And, during the whole reapplication process, the pandemic kind of started out. And during that time, nothing about my professional resume that had anything to do with medical stuff changed. So there would have been no expectation for there to be a change after interviewing. And I just, was getting kind of frustrated, and I just wanted a job. I wanted money. And through all that, I started looking into what was hiring during the pandemic. A lot of places weren't hiring, but what was hiring were remote jobs, and a lot of the remote jobs were software. And so I was actually looking at a lot of different kind of boot camps to kind of break into software a little more. Like I knew something. I knew MATLAB. I knew like Arduino, just from my undergrad studies. And I knew C. That was like my only like real, I guess, coding language that is actually mostly used or as a standard in some places. And but I wanted to learn, something that would actually be useful. And through all these things, I ended up applying for a kind of like a starting position at HCL Tech, and it took months because I completely forgot that I had even applied to them for months. And then just 1 month, they were like, "Hey, you want to interview us? You want to interview with us?" I was like, "Okay, sure." And I did it, and they're like, "Yep, we'll take you in." And so when they took me in, I wasn't really understanding 100% what I was doing, what I was going to be doing for them. And then,
how did you pass the interview only knowing C and not that much code?
Well, they didn't really ask me very many technical questions. And this was because later on I figured out that they were just kind of filtering through people, and they wanted to do the same things that a lot of other bootcamp companies do. So I don't know if you're familiar with Accenture and those kinds of companies, that what they do is they take in people, they do a boot camp for 10 to 12 weeks. And then in your contract that you sign with Accenture, you say that you will go wherever they send you. So Accenture has contracts with a lot of other big companies. And once I'm done with my 10 to 12 weeks of training, they'll just match me to a company. And that company might be, down the road here in Austin, or it might be in Boston, or it might be in Chicago, or it might be in the middle of nowhere in North Dakota, and you just have to go there and you have to work there for 2 years. And that's like the guarantee. Like you will have your first 2 years of software engineering experience through them. And so HCL their thought was, okay, we take in a lot of Accenture people, but we don't like their standards very much. So we're going to do it ourselves. So I was I think I was HCL Tech's second cohort of people that they had taken in to do all this training. So I did 3 months of training, mostly full stack web development with Java. And then I was getting just sent out into the world. Right. And so that's why a lot of the interview questions didn't really matter, because they just wanted to know if I was competent enough to be able to learn the programming
So
language.
for someone out there that's also going to do that interview, like how can you prepare for it if they want to pass that interview, right? Is it just like, is it be smart? Is it personal questions? Like is there any detail you can provide on like what that's like?
I mean, that interview was in like 2021. That was literally 3 years ago, because it was February 2021 too. So it was exactly 3 years ago. But I do remember that there weren't very many difficult questions. It was like, do you know what an object-oriented language is? Do you know what a command window is? And it's like, very basic computer questions, not too in depth. They're not looking for, previous knowledge of, oh, I know how to do this algorithm, or I know how to do this kind of thing. No, they're just looking to know that you have been able to look at a YouTube video that introduces you to the topic of programming, and that you understood most of the things.
How competitive is it to get into these programs? And do they pay you or do you pay them?
No, so that's another big thing. A lot of these programs, they are like they'll pay you a stipend. It was kind of for the HCL Tech, the stipend at first was, I think it was 45K. And so from there, if you had to sign like a 2-year contract, right? And if you left HCL Tech before those 2 years were up, you had to pay anywhere between 0 and 20K. So if you left immediately after the training, it was 20K. If you left a year after, it was 10K. And so, proportional to how much time you were in there, you had to pay off just, that's to cover the cost of training. They're not going to train you for free for 6 months and pay you and then just be like, oh yeah, leave us, go somewhere else, be free. They're making an investment in you, so you have to, also, work for them and, fulfill your end of the investment, I guess. So a lot of people in my cohort weren't engineers. I think one guy that I really got along with well, he was a music teacher. He had never done anything in tech before, but he was competent, and he was really, came out to do really well. He was one of the best coders on my team, because we got separated into small teams for like a month-long project, and he was on my team, and him and I probably did most of the project ourselves. But there's all kinds of people on there. I think there was another girl on there who already had a master's degree in data science, and she was in there already. Just trying to get into this at this point where so many people were trying to get into this sector, right? And then after those months of training were done, they said, okay, you're assigned to USAA. And as part of USAA, I had to learn a lot of different things. I think it was like a data science suite made by Oracle. I can't exactly remember what it was called, but I had never seen this kind of things before. And so I think it was maybe 2 months of training to familiarize myself with the system. And we were a team of 18 engineers. And of those 18 engineers, after those 2 months of training, only 2 of us. And it wasn't me. I don't know why. I don't know how they picked them, but the two of us were working, and the rest of us were just kind of doing nothing for 3 or 4 months.
Like they literally picked like, you two are gonna work and you guys, I don't know, have fun.
I don't know how it was. I think it was like I think USAA was taking in people to have and to work with before they had jobs for them to do. But I'm not really sure how that happened. But what did happen was in November, I remember I got a call from some guy, also in HCL Tech, from a manager from a new contract that they had, and there were no details for anything. And I got a call. He called me, and he said it was literally a 5-minute call, and he said, "Hey, are you open to relocation still?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay." You have a degree in engineering? Yeah. All right. Cool. Hung up. I was like, what is what is this about? And then the very next day I got an email for onboarding at Facebook. And that's when the whole thing with, now I've been at Meta working for them for the last 2 years.
So how did they know that you had the qualifications to work at Meta?
I mean, apparently the qualifications were just, do you have an engineering degree? But I think, they made their own calls. During the whole training process that I went through, there were, various tests and quizzes and projects, and everything was very cataloged. I mean, it was like going to school, right? And so there were grades that I never saw, but the people there at at HCL saw those grades, right? And so they made their own judgment call on whether I was qualified enough to be on this team to go into Meta.
And out of your batch class, like where did everyone get placed? Like what was the results of that? Like you started at USAA, you went to Meta. How many people were in that batch? Was it 50? Was it 100? Was it 10? And how many ended up going to Meta?
Of that batch, we were, I think, about 35. And everyone who was in that batch who had an engineering degree is now at Meta. So a lot of those people that I was in that class, I still work with them. So my team at Meta were 96 people, and in those 96, I think it's like 50 of them are in the US. So we're US time zone, and from those 50, there's maybe like 10 or 15 teams, and we're all interspersed in those teams. Although one of them, Jesus, actually is working on my team, and so that's pretty cool that we've been there from the start.
So what kind of people do you think the program was good for? And like in hindsight, you got started in your career here and it was probably really helpful.
Mhm.
But I'm just wondering, like, would you recommend it in the future? What kind of people is it right for? What kind of people is it not right for starting going down this route of like becoming a contractor and going to work for all of companies they set you up with?
Well, I definitely think it's good for people who don't have a lot of experience. I mean, you go through job listings nowadays, and you'll see all these roles for like starting positions, and they'll ask for 3 or 5 years of experience. It's like, well, how am I supposed to get that experience? I think this way it kind of takes a lot of the pressure off, in that the contractor looks for that experience for you, right? So that's kind of like what they do. They're starting. These are companies that start you off on your journey, even though you have no experience. So the thing about these boot camp contractors is that it is just all on you, right? So it's, if you can take it, then you get the job. Like there isn't going to be someone who is going to finish the entire program and then never get hired, because what they do is they just place you. So it would be like a big company will come into the and say, we need 10 of your people, and your contractor will say, okay, you and you guys have the minimum qualifications. Okay, we send you over. And so that's kind of one of the cool things about these kinds of boot camps, is that they have kind of a guarantee that you will have work experience afterwards. And what you do after those 2 years is completely up to you.
And I think one follow-up that I want to ask is, like, in that 10 to 12 week boot camp that they gave you, how intense was it? Is it something that like you can do part-time? Is it always full-time? And like, were you like sweating, or was it kind of like, okay, I can do this pretty easily?
The first 3 months is definitely like a 9 to 5 job. It is, you are on video calls or with the instructor. It's basically going to school for 9 to 5 for 3 months. And it's not super intensive because you're only focused on one subject. It's like if you went through a semester of college and only took one class. and then you have, the rest of the day to do whatever you want, right? So you can you have homework, but it's not really intensive because it's only one class, and a lot of the homework is like a group project, so you divide the work. um and it really all is just, it's not, I didn't think it was very intensive, but I did have previous experience with coding languages, so it wasn't completely new to me. I always think of coding, the different coding languages, as like learning different dialects of your own language that you already know. So it's a lot of things are similar. You just have to learn the new grammar, right? The new syntax of how to make x equals b over here, make x equals b over here. They're kind of all on the same track. So it all really depends on how much you're willing to put in either extra work or if you already know some things. And there are definitely resources out there that you can use to help you on your way.
Do some people fail to finish the program?
Yes. I think in my cohort there wasn't, but I did hear of other people from I think there were like two cohorts that were going on at the same time, and the other one, I think like two or three people failed out of it. And then there are also people who just leave. They just don't want to do it. They didn't like it, or they maybe got a job offer somewhere else before already. So I think there was one guy on my team actually that he got a job offer straight out somewhere else, and he just left. Uh, I don't know if the job offer was in software in tech like this, but he left anyway.
How would you describe the quality of the education? Because it almost sounds like an amazing deal, right? Because like you could pay $20,000 for a boot camp, or you could study on your own, or you can do this, and it sounds like way better to do this.
I mean, yes, it all kind of depends on how people are. So some people don't like the idea of being kept somewhere for 2 years, at the risk of having to pay off. For me, it I saw it as an investment of my own. It might not have been a financial investment, but it was definitely a time investment. Um,
Were
yeah.
most people were most people happy with their placements?
I think so. Yeah. The two guys who were working at USAA, I think they stayed at USAA, and then the rest of us that had engineering degrees went to Meta. And I don't think anyone really, argued too loudly about, oh no, I have to go to work at Facebook.
And if you have your eyes set on a certain company, can you somehow affect the decision or let the advisors or people in charge of the program know that you would prefer to be placed in a certain company?
So when I interviewed at Accenture to do this kind of similar thing, I actually asked that question, and they said that there was nothing you could do. That it was, you got placed where you got placed, and that was the deal. That was part of the deal. He did tell me that there was like a higher percentage of people getting hired like toward Texas and California, so that might influence my decision a little bit. Um, but it wasn't something that I can say like, oh no, I want to work there. I want to work for that contractor, and then they'll place me there, right? That's not typically how it works. And HCL, I didn't really ask about that. I was pretty satisfied from where I got assigned, so I didn't, it wasn't too big of a deal for me.
Do you have to be open to relocation?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could have said no, that I wasn't open to relocation, and they would have just kept me on that USAA team. I think that was just for moving people between contracts, right? But
I thought it was geographical.
yes, so for the other companies that do that, yes, it was geographical. But for HCL, I never really told them that I was open to relocation until they asked after I was already placed at USAA. So most of the people that were in my cohort to be at HCL were in San Antonio. So I assumed that the, all of them were already in San Antonio, and we all got assigned to San Antonio companies. So that wasn't kind of like a relocation kind of thing. But then when they moved us to Meta, they wanted us to be in Austin. So I don't think that was a huge relocation issue for them, since Austin and San Antonio are so close to each other. But I don't know if HCL requires you to be open to relocation like the other ones do.
And is this kind of deal that HCL does, is that kind of common in the industry for contracting companies, or is this kind of unique to them?
So this was something that I was seeing pop up a lot in like the year like 2019, the year leading up to the pandemic. I started seeing a lot of companies starting to do this, where they train you in a boot camp and then they send you out on a contract to somewhere else. I think Accenture was one of the first ones to do it. I'm not 100% sure, but they weren't the only company that I remember. They're just the biggest one that I remember that was doing this. Uh, but even then, even that at Meta now, I still see a lot of people who are contingent workers like me, but they're not from HCL. They're from Accenture. So and there's many more different companies that do that as well.
And are they still doing it today? Even after the pandemic, even like after the tech apocalypse?
Ooh, I'm not sure. Especially now because of all the layoffs that have been happening. I'm not sure if there's a lot of demand for it still. Um,
So you kind of caught a wave.
yeah, I kind of caught that last wave, I think is what it was.
Okay.
Yeah, that last big wave.
And what is it like to work at a FANG company, and here specifically Meta? What is it like to work at one of these FANG companies? Or like, have you heard that term
FANG?
before?
No.
It's like Facebook, Amazon, Google, all these bigger companies. Like, what is it like to work there?
I mean, it's definitely like the first few weeks were like very like whoa. They sent me my very nice big huge MacBook Pro, like, and like, oh yeah, just have some. I also got a work phone, the Pixel 5. But I also saw that you could also get iPhones if you really needed them. I didn't really need it, so I had no real reason to request an iPhone. But it is definitely impressive at first, especially the whole there's a lot of perks that people don't really talk about, particularly at Meta. We get food every day. Lunch and breakfast and lunch is provided for every single day. And it's like not like breakfast is mostly, always like your eggs, your cereal, your oatmeal, your bagels and stuff. But the lunch sometimes will be insane. It'll be like I remember this one. It was fried chicken, fried in what is it? Funnel cake batter with powdered sugar and and cornbread flapjacks, like super gourmet. That just things that you don't really think would be the provided lunch at where you work. So like there'll be days that'll be themed. It'll be like, oh, this day is Mexican, this day is French food, this day is from New Orleans, this day is barbecue. So that's one of my favorite perks. And then there's coffee machines on every floor and snacks and drinks and all that, anything you can really want. And that's just in a contingent worker building, which is where I work in. So Meta has different buildings here in Austin. They have some downtown buildings, and then there are some in the domain. In the domain is where I'm at. We have a lot of we're almost all just contingent workers in that building, and then in the downtown building is full-time employees, so FTEs. I can go to the downtown building whenever I want. Nothing bars me from going there. It's not like oh no, you guys are contractors, you're off to the side. It's not like that at all. But if you look at my assigned office, it is the domain office. And there are some nicer things in the full-time employee building. Like they'll have a bit more options for food, and a few more perks. I think they have like washing machines and stuff like that, uh, and like a music room, so you can go in and you can play music, and it's just like sound proof on all the walls and everything. You can go in and just jam. I think it's called a jam room. I think is what it's called. Um, but it is it is a little overwhelming at first, just because there's just a bunch of stuff that you can do there, right? And everything is very clear. So one of the things I had to do to start working at Meta was get a Facebook account. I didn't have a Facebook account. But so I had to make a Facebook account, and that's kind of because it's tied into like an internal social media that they have called Workplace. And Workplace basically is kind of like there's a bunch of different things that on there. That's where all the internal workers and both full-time employees, contingent workers, and even third-party vendors can go into Workplace, get a Workplace account, and you can post on like different groups and things like that. You can do like DMs and video chats and that kind of stuff on Workplace. So it's like a very social Slack, I would say. I mean, even there are even groups, like a lot of groups are like work groups. So I'm on 3 teams in Meta, and so each of those teams has their own Workplace group where people who have issues on the application that I work on a team, they'll post there, and then from there, someone will answer it, or they'll create a task. And when that task is created, that task goes to me, right? So I can look at the posts that the tasks are tied to, and on the post, you basically just say like whatever you want, right? You like, oh, I had trouble clicking the submit button. It's grayed out for me, and that will be a task. But first, it was like a post, right? But then there are also social posts, so social groups. So there's like soccer at ATX, like climbing at Austin. I actually got added to a group that I always love. It's called Daniel at Meta, and it's all the Daniels at Meta. And I love that group.
How do you address each other?
I don't know.
Numbers?
Daniel
Someone
number
will just be like,
197.
"Hey, Dan's, I wanted to share this thing about this thing that I learned about Daniels," and people will just go on there and like, and that group of Daniel at Meta had, I think at its peak, we had 1,300 members. There are a lot of Daniels at Meta. That's pretty cool.
Do they have one for each? Do they have one for each first name, or only the popular ones?
I have no idea. Honestly, I have never really looked into it. I've only looked at mine because mine's the only that matters to me.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So, how does contracting work? Like how many hours do you work every day?
Well, I'm contracted to work, the standard 40 hours a week. So what it is it's not so much that so it kind of depends on the team that you're on. So I think all of the HCL teams, we work for internal teams. So, excuse me, internal applications. So like my applications are like sourcing and supplier connect. And but there are also teams that manage the menus for for lunch every day. So there's a bunch of different things that we manage. But what we do is we manage it on like a 24 hours. So my team is divided between the United States office. So our central part is in Austin. So I work from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then at 6 p.m., I hand off to Singapore. And so then the Singapore office, also HCL people, will be from their 8 a.m. to their 4 p.m. and then they hand off to London, and then London works from their 8 a.m. to their 4 p.m., and then they hand off back to us, right? So if we were Pacific time, we would also work 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. But since we're in Central, we work 10 to 6, right? So I will be on call for any tasks that come in during those 8 hours. My team is a little smaller. We're only 3 people in my US time zone, but then there are other teams that are 10 or even 20 people in the US time zone because they have just a huge load of tasks. My team doesn't have that big of a tasks. I think it's actually gotten better in my team. Every couple of months, we'll go through the number of tasks that we get will be like reduced by half after like a big update will happen, right? But most of the time, we'll get it depends on the application. So since we're 3 people and we manage 2 tasks, two applications, we'll have one person will be on call for one, the other person will be the on call for the other one, and then the third person will be like the backup. So what we do is we send our third task. Every third task will go to our backup, and he'll work on both of the applications, whereas the other ones will be just for those applications. And so we rotate that every week, right? So every 2 weeks every 3 weeks I'll be the backup. And like being the backup is like your nice week. It's like when you have like almost like very, very little workload, and then the other 2 applications I mentioned are sourcing and supplier connect. Sourcing will have very, very few different types of tasks, and most of those tasks will take very little time to do. But then the supplier connect, that's like the workhorse one. That one will have a ton of different things. You'll have some weeks we'll have maybe 2 or 3 tasks a day. Some weeks we'll have maybe 10 or 15, right? So it can vary. The thing is as contingent workers, we also don't have a lot of access to sensitive information. Since it makes sense. I don't work for this company as a full-time employee. I didn't sign all their waivers and stuff. I signed other things, when I became the contractor. But they all have the access to like the sensitive information. So each of our teams also works with a team of meta engineers. So we'll be like the frontline ones. And if there's something that we can't do because it's behind like an access, some sort of access that, sensitive information, then that will be escalated to the engineering team, right? And so they'll be the ones who work on those kinds of tasks.
Do you participate in the evaluation system in Facebook as a contractor?
What do you mean?
Like usually in those companies, like full-time employees, they get evaluations every period, and you get ranked like top tier or like mid tier.
Gotcha. No, I go through that through HCL Tech though, where I do have to do like a self-evaluation, and then I'll send that to like my manager, and then my manager will evaluate me, and they'll do whatever it is they do with that. It's not so much like we get ranked like that, but that I don't do that through for Meta. I only do that for HCL.
So is it important to do well on those? Like I know that they're kind of like grades, right? That gets sent to HCL. Is it important to do well in this program at Meta?
Yes. Yeah, so that a lot of the things that we get like evaluated for on the HCL side is for how well we do on the Meta side, right? So like one of the things that we work on is how quickly we respond to a task. So if it's like high priority task, we have 30 minutes to get to it, to just put the initial response of like, hey, I see your task and I'm working on it, right? If it's a mid priority, it's like 2 hours. No, sorry, it's 1 hour. And if it's like a low priority, it'll be 2 hours. And then there's like a very special priority called unbreak now. That's like catastrophic if you don't get to it immediately. That one's like, you got to get to it within 5 minutes, right? And so that's one of the metrics that they kind of grade us on, right? how quickly we get to a task, how long it takes us to solve the task, and how long it takes us to close the task. Because solving and closing a task is two very different things. Because you can solve the issue, but then I have to talk to whoever had the issue and make sure that that issue was solved on their side as well, not just on my side, right? So then sometimes that will be one thing that will take the longest to do. It'll be to get the person to respond back to me to tell me, yeah, yeah, you did your job. um, uh, but that's like the main thing that we get kind of graded on is those metrics.
And how hard are these tasks, would you say? Like, can you give us some examples of like a couple tasks you did in the last week?
So, um, so let's say sourcing is like kind of my easier week versus supplier connect. That one will be those tasks can be really really quickly. A lot of times, the sourcing platform is pretty good. It works really really well. It doesn't have a lot of uh, issues with it. It'll most of the tasks will be super user access kind of thing. So as the worker on it, I'll just have super user access, and I'll be able to change things that people on the other side won't be able to change. And so that one, those are pretty easy. Those are people will ask like, "Oh, please add this email to this supplier," and I'll be, okay, add it, right? Or please change, make me the manager instead of this person. You just type in their name and click edit, and it's done. So those will be super quick. But then there are also other tasks that can take, like quite some time, and you have to go through like sometimes there'll be uh, they'll try to push this worksheet to the database, but the numbers of like the parts don't match in the inventory. And so you'll have to go in and go through all the parts individually on the inventory, look through the logs and all that kind of stuff. And that can take anywhere between like an hour and a half to 2 hours just for one task. So, and even then, you have to like then you have to once you get all the information, you would send that to like the inventory team, and then it's like correspondence with them to fine tune everything, make sure everything's good, and then I also talk to the person who was trying to submit the worksheet in the first place. So it can those ones can be very intensive. Um, so yeah, there's definitely a variety in the tasks, although most of the tasks for the application will be on the easy end. Whereas on the supplier side, there you can have a lot of different tasks that can be ranged from that's mostly for onboarding suppliers. But there's also for suppliers to submit invoices. So which is where we get really into the sensitive information, right? So when you're dealing with invoices, you deal with bank accounts and routing numbers and that kinds of stuff. So that's why a lot of those tasks we will have to work with the engineering team because they can actually do stuff with that information, or they can actually not look at that information. And so, and we won't have access to that, right?
Do you feel that contractors are treated or seen differently at Meta compared to Meta employees?
Not particularly, no. I've never really had a situation where I've been looked down on for being a contractor. Um, the only thing I can think of is like, you know, sometimes we'll get like cookies for dessert and they'll get creme brulee, but that's not a big thing. That's not big of a deal.
Is it obvious to everyone that who's a contractor and who's a Meta employee, or if they don't ask you, you can't tell?
I don't think it's obvious. I don't, if you ask, I don't see why you wouldn't say like, oh no, I'm a contingent worker or I'm a full time employee. It will, if we're face to face, it won't be obvious. But if I'm online, on Workplace, if I hover over your name, it will tell me if you're a full-time employee or a contingent worker. And it'll give me all the information. It'll tell me like what seat you sit in, like in your office building.
How many contingent workers does Facebook have?
Oh, I don't know, but I think a lot less now. I have noticed that in my particular office, the parking lot is halfway empty now.
Why is that?
I don't know, but yeah, I just remember just one day over 1 week, I was gone. I left for Mexico for vacation, and I came back the next week, and we used to fill up the like the parking lot to the 6th floor, and now it doesn't even fill up the 3rd floor. And it was just like overnight.
Do any of the contingent workers do software development, like building new features as well? And how
Yeah.
does that work?
So that's usually that will be on like other teams. So like my teams are mostly maintenance. We maintain the internal applications. But I remember in my office seat, a few tables over, there were some people, excuse me, that they did work on developing new features. They mostly worked on gaming features. So that was really a big thing to always be watching people in front of you working on video games, and then I was here like working on my stuff. But I think they did something on like some of them did stuff on like ads, and then another team did stuff on like actually like making the game like be suitable for like I think the meta AR goggles, the quests. Yeah. So they all had sets of like Quest 3s and like would play the games and like kind of test them out and do that kind of stuff.
How much of your time do you have to spend coding? And how does it work for like the different contractors?
Okay. So the thing about my team is that my team specifically deals with a lot of sensitive information. And so access to the code base is very restricted for my team. So I don't really do a lot of code. I do very, very little, very, very minimal. But then there are other teams also on HCL that they will do tons. They will have tons of different diffs that they'll have to do, that they'll have done over the year. So that's like one of the metrics that we get also graded on, was that, how many diffs did you make and how many of those diffs were accepted. But I've never done a diff because I've never had to. A lot of the things on my side of where I work is very efficient and automated. So going into the code base, I mean, I think the engineers on my team also very rarely go into the code base as well. So like the engineers, I mean, people from Meta themselves. So it's very on my side, it's like, should I count as a software engineer? Probably not, maybe. But overall, on the team that I work with, and all that I learned and all that I had to do is software engineering, right? So it was just kind of lucky, I guess, that I don't have to do it, right? But if I did have to do it, like I would, right? I am in theory just as competent in the code that everyone else had to learn to be able to do this kind of stuff at Meta as everyone else, or I was as competent when we started out in November 2021.
So that's kind of like the deal you sign up for. You sign up for 2 years. They will train you. If you leave early, you have to pay back for the training. You don't really get to choose the company. You don't really get to choose the location, and you don't really get to choose the work. But if you stick around, it's pretty much a guaranteed job.
Exactly.
I gotcha.
What happens after the program finishes?
Like after the 2 years are up? Well, those 2 years were up for me last April. And I am actually currently getting my master's degree for something completely different. So to me, it didn't really seem like I was comfortable here, right? I have a lot of liberty, a lot of I had a lot of ability to travel. I went a lot all over the place. Um, so I didn't have very much incentive to start to try to looking other places. I did at one point. I interviewed at Google, Amazon, Microsoft. Um, all of them reached out to me. I didn't reach out to them. Um, but that was right before all the layoffs started. So I think it was literally June, and then in July all the layoffs started, and all of those job opportunities just went like, "Oh, we don't need you anymore." So I kind of kind of happened that way, in that I didn't wasn't really active in it. It just kind of happened. um, but you can, now that those 2 years are up, I can at any moment just say like, "Oh, I'm out. I'm going somewhere else," or I'll put in my 2 weeks notice, right? Um, and I won't have to pay off or anything. Um, there was, although the contract did have some stipulations in it that, like, once you finish once you finish your training, your salary goes up. After the first year, your salary goes up. So like, these contracts also do have, they have a guarantee raise in them. A little, not too crazy. Like, I think once the training, it was like 45K of a stipend, and then once you finish a training after 6 months, you immediately went up to like 50K, and then after the first year, you went up to 60, and then kind of like that. Um, but after the contract ended, those guarantees kind of go away. Now it's just like a normal job, where if you want a raise, you got to ask for it, and you got to negotiate for it, and that kind of stuff.
And do most people stay?
I think most people have stayed right now because of the whole thing where a lot of people are getting laid off, um, and or they're just comfortable and they like it. I know that it used to be that in tech, you would work somewhere for 2 years and then you would leave, go somewhere else, work 2 years and leave, and you can't really do that anymore as so much, because just they're not looking for that kind of worker anymore.
If you decide to stay, is the compensation comparable to someone that didn't enter into Meta through the program?
No. Wait, what? Did
So,
you? Yeah.
so after the program finishes, right,
Mhm,
you
yeah.
can choose to stay in Meta,
Yeah.
but then you won't be subject to any HCL limitations. So at this period of time, how is the compensation determined? Is it like a full-time job?
I'm pretty sure you're still working for HCL.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for
Okay,
So
HCL.
it's just HCL extends the contract.
Yeah, HCL. Yeah, so like HCL has a contract
Uh,
with Meta, and then I had a contract with HCL. Now that that contract with HCL expired, I'm still like that contract. The only thing about that contract was that if I left before the first 2 years, I had to pay back the time, or the training, right? So
mhm.
that was all that contract was. Um, so now that that contract is up, I still work for HCL, and HCL still has that contract for Meta, right? So my salary doesn't depend on Meta at all. It all
Mhm.
depends on me talking to HCL and negotiating that for myself.
Got you. So you're just extending your contract with HCL.
Yes.
I see.
Well, he's not on contract with HCL.
Yeah,
He's just
I'm
working
not. I'm
for
not. I'm
HCL.
not in contract with HCL anymore. Yeah.
He's just an at-will worker who happens to work at HCL, and HCL has a contract with Meta.
Yes.
And do
Uh,
all the, I think you call them not contractors. What word do you? Contingent
Contingent
workers. Do
workers.
all
Yeah.
the contingent workers at Meta have similar compensation, or does it kind of vary based on who hires you in?
I think it varies based on who hires you in. I know that most people who are on my HCL team have salaries pretty similar to mine. But I would imagine that the salaries would definitely differ based on what contract, or what contractor company you are coming in with.
Hmm.
Also, Meta, like, let's say like one of the big names in tech, might pay more than like USAA.
I'm pretty sure what he's saying is that if Meta hires two contracting companies, HCL and Accenture, HCL and Accenture may give their employees different contracts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's definitely independent of what the contract is. And it's just your
Whatever
relationship
HCL
with
happens
your
to,
own
okay.
company.
Okay. Just whatever they happen to negotiate with the company that you
Mhm.
end up working with.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole point of why these companies get contractors, right? Because it's cheaper than a full time employee. A full time employee will have all these like different benefits, all medical, vision, all that kind of stuff, and then the salaries, and then but it's like, oh no, it's Meta. Your expectations for how much you're gonna make at Meta are like pretty big, so you have your bigger salaries. Whereas when they contract HCO, they just give HCO their money, and HCO distributes that to their employees however they need to, and then they make whatever else they have, right? So it's cheaper for Meta to have those contractors there than it is to have to hire a bunch of full-time employees, because most of the time our salaries will be lower than a full-time employees.
Can you
And we're
become a
definitely
full?
going to, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Celine.
Can you become a full-time employee somehow? Like, how does that process work?
Yes, so you can. Um, I know that it used to happen a lot before. I don't know if it still happens a lot now, with all this efficiency kind of thing that all the companies are doing. Dropping a lot of workers and laying off a lot of people. I don't know if they still do that as much as they used to. But they I remember when I interviewed at Accenture that they said that a lot of the times, like maybe like 90% of the times after the 2 years are up. So that was actually part of like their strategy there at Accenture. It was that after your 2 years were up with that first company, by contract, you couldn't work at that company afterwards, and then that company had to come in, buy out that contract, and then to be able to take you in. So by default, that company would make back all their money from you, and then you would go and work at that company. So that the guy told me that maybe like 90% of the workers got hired on after the 2 years like that, because the company would just say, I'm not going to hire a new person every 2 years. I want this person to keep doing what they're doing. Yeah.
And going back a little bit to like the culture at Meta, I think that people would like to know that. So, and especially from a contractor perspective, um, from your experience working at Meta, is it very stressful? Are people kind of on edge? Are people kind of, I don't know, do people seem like they're having a good time there, or not?
I definitely see people having a very good time there. You walk in and to like the floor, and in the areas where people are like working together on their so what it is it'll be a bunch of just like desks, like big long desks. All of them are like standing or sitting desks, those kinds of things. And it'll just be rows and rows and rows of desks and just monitors on the desk, and then you hook up your Meta provided computer, which can be either a Mac or it can be a Dell or it can be a Lenovo. I've seen like 4 or 5 different computers that they give out, and you monitor with it. But I've seen a lot of like clusters of desks just completely decorate everything. So they'll have a one full desk like cleared out, and then just have puzzles, and people will walk over and work on the puzzle during their spare time. You can go and drink coffee at the at like the little kitchenettes on every floor. So and there there'll be like chairs and seats and everything. There's couches all over the place. You'll see people just reading. Then there's also a lot of cubicles for that are like soundproof for meetings, and you'll have big meeting ones, and then you'll have ones where it'll just be one desk and one monitor for more personal kind of thing. And then there's some of them that are literally just two couches, not even a desk, just two couches, and then like the screen that has the camera, so you can do video calls from a couch. Um, and yeah, I every now and then you'll see like uh, they'll bring in like someone to bring ice cream to all the workers, or maybe something else, so like along those lines. I also remember seeing for Halloween, the week of Halloween, there was like a theme. So every day was like a different theme. So like Monday was like pajama day, and like Tuesday was like sports day and stuff like that. So it's definitely, it's very laid back. It's not too stressful at all. I also think that being able to kind of wear whatever you want, you can go in sweatpants and flip flops if you want. I feel like that kind of really kind of keeps the people you know happy about going into work, and and there's also the fact that the domain is right there, so the domain has a lot of different restaurants and shops that you can go in. So during your lunch hour, you can walk out of the building and go get lunch at like a really nice place to eat lunch. um and even in downtown, the downtown offices, there's all those restaurants there as well. So it's definitely a very good, very very laid back culture.
And is that for the contingent workers, or is that everybody at Meta?
That's
At least in
everybody
that
in
office.
Meta. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And like that's the environment. What are the people like?
Well, there's different kinds of people, right? I've only had positive experience with people there. I have yet to encounter someone who's like negative or aggressive or anything. Um, Most people are pretty nice. They're pretty approachable. It's very interesting also walking in and hearing a lot of different languages. I didn't expect to walk into Meta and hear a lot of like I've heard Russian, I've heard a lot of Spanish, I've heard Portuguese, I've heard Chinese, Korean, um, a lot of Hindu. So there's definitely a very big diversity, very large amount of diversity. And if in just like anywhere, you can find your people and the people like, and then there's other people, right? But I haven't seen anyone be rude or aggressive to anyone there in 2 years. So I would say they're a pretty good group of people.
When your contract, like HCL's contract with Meta expires, if you don't get an offer from Meta, does HCL just put you somewhere else?
HL, yeah, will just put me somewhere else.
So I think we have a good idea of what your experience has been like working at Meta. Now we get into like the real juicy stuff I think a lot of people want to hear, if you're open to talk about it. Um, are you comfortable talking about like what your offer was like when you first started at HCL, maybe with USAA, and if that changed when you went over to Meta?
So when I started out at HCL, I think I mentioned that you start off with like a learner's stipend, and I can't remember if it was 40 or 45K, but I'm pretty sure it was 45. And then as soon as the 6 months of training were up, that went up to, it was like 52. And then there was a clause in my contract that stated that after the first year was up, I was open to be able to request a salary raise. So I wasn't able to request, a higher salary until a year was up, right? And when that year was up, yeah, I definitely did that. And that went up from 50, it was from 50 something all the way up to like 65. So, I think it's pretty good, after 1 year working, year and a half maybe ish. Yeah, because that's another thing. After I requested it, it did take some time. And even though, um, so like it was kind of weird in that, like they agreed to give me a raise in like June, and then in October, they said, okay, yeah, you got your raise effective July. So then it was like, okay. And so my first paycheck was like, whew, it was huge because I got a bunch of back pay all the way from July and October, but then I got like the regular paychecks afterwards. But it did take a long time, a lot longer than I thought it would take, and I thought it was a little too complicated. But and then after the second year was up, when my contract ended, that's when I tried to really start to try to negotiate a little bit more, just because for where I work, and because my salary, what it was is that it was originally for being in San Antonio, which is a cheaper city than Austin. So when I tried to negotiate for the second time, I tried to really bring that in. It's like, hey, like I'm in a different city that is a lot more expensive than San Antonio. Like I think I my first apartment that I was here, the after the first year, the rent doubled. It literally doubled. I've never seen that before. Um, so like that was one thing that was like, dude, like, come on, man, you gotta help me out here. You gotta help me out. And but and then they gave me a 9% increase, which was like, it's pretty good. Like, I think what standards like 5%. So it's pretty nice at that point. But now it's like a lot harder to request for some reason. I think it's because they're actually bringing in a lot more workers. So like the team's expanding. Um, so I don't know if they're taking that into account. In that, bigger team means that there's less money to go out for everyone. But I am like currently in the process of negotiating for another raise.
Give it to him.
Give it to me. Please.
Cool.
How much do you want to be making?
I think, it would be nice. Well, the thing is I have to also balance the amount of work that I do, you know. I can't really I don't feel right requesting, for those big salaries that a bunch of people have for the little itty bitty amount of work that I do right now. But I would at least like to be making, what the average worker in Austin makes, which is around like 85.
Is there anything about, let's say, the contract experience, the experience at Facebook, or the before or after that you feel we didn't really cover that adds some like color to your experience? Is there something that we missed because we're not too familiar with this?
Mm-hmm. Let me think about that. I don't know. I think we pretty much covered everything. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else.
Cool.
Do you like your job?
It's a little tedious at times, but I think all jobs have their pros and cons, right? And at first, at first when I started out, I loved it, and I think now it's just more that there isn't a lot of variety, and that's just a me thing. And a lot of one of the big reasons why I wanted to go into the medical field was for more variety on a day-to-day basis. There isn't a lot of variety here. Most of the tasks are pretty much the same as the one before it. So that's just for me. I don't like not having that variety.
And that's why you're going back to do a master's.
Yes, that's why I'm getting my master's.
I do want to ask, what do you want to transition into?
Well, I'm currently getting my master's in space systems engineering. So I want to transition into the space sector.
Is there any specific role or company or anything that you're looking for?
Not really. I kind of just one one of the things that mainly attracts me is I want to work more with like in a laboratory setting, like a little more on hands on. Um, so I know that a lot of my professors in my masters are work in the sector already. Um, and there is a few that have really caught my eye and kind of what I want to do. And one of them is like working on propulsion would be really awesome.
That's actually what I did for
Hey, there
my
we go.
master's. Because I'm a mechanical engineer, so who
Cool.
turned software engineer. No, but this was really cool, man. I did not know a lot about the contracting world. I work with some contractors in my job, and yeah, I didn't really know how they got in the company, or like we don't really treat them any differently. Like, but like they do have some like access restrictions and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But in my head, they're just another software engineer. But I don't really know how they got their job, how they got in the company. I think I learned a lot in this conversation about that kind of through your story. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
I feel like I've talked to so many software engineers, and you're I think the first person that we've actually talked to that's gone through the contracting route. So it's pretty
Mm.
cool.
There's actually contractors in law too. I heard about it the first time like around COVID, and I was like,
Mhm.
wow, this is so interesting. But I've never met anyone that's been through a program like this because it's very
Yeah.
new in law. I guess it's probably more common in software. And at the time, it was like super, super new. The company was only 2 years old or something. So it's interesting to know like your experience.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I never really considered, growing up or even in college. You never really hear about this kind of stuff. Like I've heard like, like contract work, you know, where you go out and you work on your job over here and then you come back and you work on this job. But I've never heard about like, this kind of long-term contract working.
Yeah.